Welcome, everyone. We're excited to see you. Let's see. Feel free to introduce your name in the chat. Where are you from and where are you joining? And thank you so much for joining today. Welcome back to Creative West Capacity Building webinar series. My name is Ashanti McGee, and I am the Grants, Awards, and Programs Manager here at Creative West, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. This webinar focus today is Creative West capacity building, focused on community outreach and engagement in complex climates. And we're also joined by two of our ASL interpreters from Indigenous Ways today. A recording and slide deck will be sent to all participants following this meeting. And while you're here today, please take a moment to complete our webinar survey. Your responses help us improve this series and focus on the topics that matter most to you. And next, I want to introduce my co-facilitator, our Grants, Awards, and Programs Coordinator, Marcelina Ramirez. And I'll pass it over to her to start us off.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashanti. I'm going to be going over just a few housekeeping things before we get started and introduce our guest speaker for today. I'm going to go over our preamble, which you will see on the screen. Creative West shares a fundamental and abiding commitment to equity, accessibility, inclusion, and belonging. We recognize and greatly appreciate the extraordinary contributions of our team and the impact we seek to have in our communities in the West and beyond. We understand that trust is built slowly with communities we wish to serve that have experienced generational betrayal and trauma. Our shared commitments provide a grounding for generating spaces of trust and safety within our team and in communities we seek to serve through our work. We are dedicated to seeing these communities reflected in our work over time consistently. For today's shared commitments, we value humility, learning from our mistakes, and asking questions to gain deeper understanding. We feel empowered to hold one another accountable, establish boundaries, and ask each other for help. We lean into discomfort by facing challenges and conflict with openness and grace. We stay present by listening actively, being mindful of body language, and participating to the fullest of our ability. We share from our own experiences and grow as a team through the inclusion of every individual voice. We prioritize accessibility and are mindful of our language and ensuring belonging for all. Today's purpose of the Capacity Building webinar is designated to provide a strategic, inclusive, and responsive learning series for individual artists, culture bearers, and arts organizations across the Creative West region and beyond. Grounded in feedback from the FY25 series, this dual stream approach intentionally separates webinars for individual artists and arts administrators, allowing each group to deepen their skills in areas most relevant to their practice of operation. And so for today's Zoom norms, please keep your microphone muted when not speaking. It's in the far left corner. Please rename yourself if you're able to your first and last name and your state/jurisdiction acronym. To ask questions or make comments, please use the raise hand function and or write your question at the chat at any time. Just for today's webinar, we are going to be taking all questions at the end, but we understand for accessibility purposes, if you need to get your question in the chat, we will answer it at the end. Live transcripts and closed captions are turned on. You can view or hide them, change the size, as well as other functions by using the up arrow on live transcript, which is either in the middle of your screen or behind the More button with the 3 dots on the right side of your screen. We also have sign language interpreters for your needs. And back to you, Ashanti, to introduce our speaker with Anika Tane.
Hi, thank you so much, Marcelina. Let's see. I would like to have our director, Anika Tane, just share a few words about today's speaker.
Thanks, Ashanti. Thanks, Marcelina. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Ed Bourgeois, who is a performer, a playwright of French-Mohawk descent with 29 years of experience as an arts administrator with the Anchorage Opera, Alaska Native Heritage Center, Pa'i Foundation, and most recently, the Western Arts Alliance, where he served as program manager of Advancing Indigenous Performance until the end of the program in June. His current project is the development of PDX N8V FST, or Portland Native Festival in Portland, Oregon. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to you, Ed. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Maybe a little thumbs up.
Yes.
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 Okay. Hi, everybody. It's exciting to see the participants list, and so many people here that I know and that I've worked with that have so much more experience than me. And I want to welcome all of you and take this opportunity to say, when there's something that you can contribute, please join in. That's what the chat is for. Answer the questions in the chat, and let's make this a conversation. To reiterate, this is a Stream B presentation. In other words, it is for arts administrators. And we had this conversation at the beginning. I thought, well, it's for everybody. I think it's really, we're going to focus, or it will be most effective for those who are beginning this journey of cultural exploration and audience engagement, community engagement. But as I said, there's place for everyone to contribute. So please, if I'm missing anything, join in, add your examples, and let's make this as fruitful as possible for as many people as possible. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I am personally coming to you from what is today known as Portland, Oregon. And I came here to work at Western Arts Alliance. And Western Arts Alliance stands in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and is based respectfully in the now occupied traditional lands of bands of Chinook, Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla tribes, among others. It's a really interesting place to be because most middle schoolers have heard of the Oregon Trail and know that westward expansion of the United States, that this was one of the pathways, was the Oregon Trail that led, the terminus was Oregon City, which is just south of Portland. And that was a traditional village site. But what is now Portland was never a village site, or not traditionally a village site. It was a gathering place. And it's an interesting place to be because this big river, the Columbia River, is the superhighway for so many peoples, and where they intersected historically. So the shores of Portland were a place where peoples came together and traded. And it's an interesting and humbling experience to be in a place like this because it's very easy to assume that a geographic location was occupied by certain people, when in fact, in this region in particular, so many different tribal communities can lay claim to the same place because they came here to interact. It was not a village site. So I've learned an awful lot about that just in my 6 or 7 years here in Portland. So the short story is the Oregon Trail displaced, and there was a dislocation policy, like in many places, of sending the peoples who lived in this area, especially in Oregon, to reservations in other places, parts of the state, but just before statehood. So it's rare to run into people of those tribes living here now, but Portland is still the 9th largest urban Native population in the country. And that's because there are people from 300 plus tribes who live in Portland, mostly from other places, who have come here, like a lot of cities that were relocation cities, they have communities that were brought here at certain times to work and essentially to be dislocated from their original homes. So that's my land acknowledgement. My experience in being able to discuss this subject has to do with 19 years of working only in and with Native communities. Before that, I was in the opera business. The complete sort of opposite in many ways of what we're going to be talking about today. But it's where I learned a lot about nonprofit arts organizations. But relevant experience in terms of community engagement, and of course we did some at the opera. At least I tried to, but that was a very niche discipline with a very niche support system and supporters and donors. And when I made the choice to move into working in Native communities, it really expanded the work that we're going to be talking about today. So I went from the opera to Alaska Native Heritage Center for 7 years. And that was a place, a heritage, a cultural center, a museum, lots of public programming, and also programming for community in a state with many, many tribal identities. I won't go into it, really complicated by the Native Land Claim Settlement Act and the fact that there are tribes are actually villages. I won't get into that. But traditional tribes are broken down in Alaska into 5 major basically geographic categories. The Inupiaq and Yupik, sometimes called Eskimo peoples, Athabascan, who stretch all the way down through Canada into the United States, into the Dene people in the Southwest, all related. The Sugpiaq and Unangach people, called by the Russians Aleutian, the Aleutian Islands, and Southeast Alaska, the Eyak, Haida, Tsimshian, and Tlingit peoples. So a vast area with many, many different neighboring peoples. And one organization with many programs to try to serve all of those peoples. And that's where I began to learn something about consensus building, consensus decision making, the essential value of cultural advisory committees. The work was often in the committees led, or at least the lead speaker was generally a Dena'ina elder. So the specific land that the Alaska Native Heritage Center was located on in Anchorage, Dena'ina land. And so there's a primacy there among the elders for the tribe of that land. And a lot about intertribal communication. This will come back later when we talk about the fact that Native is a big category. And people who are not Native often wonder, well, what do you want to be called? Is it okay to say Eskimo? Or is it okay to say Indian? Bottom line is people like to be called exactly what they are. Generally, if you know the exact tribe, if someone is Yupik or Dena'ina or Diné, generally they would like that named rather than a larger category. Most white Americans don't like to be called European necessarily. So that's essentially the what would be similar for European descendants. From the Alaska Native Heritage Center to Hawaii. And hi, Nancy. Nancy King is on the line from Pai Foundation, where I was the managing director. An opposite kind of an indigenous experience, but in an organization that was more homogeneous. So one Native Hawaiian, we won't say tribe, but one identity that is Native Hawaiian. So very different from a place where there are multiple people sharing land. Of course, the Kingdom of Hawaii, if you don't know the history, take a look at that. Taken over by force and the Queen deposed by force by the United States government. And there, a dance school led by a kumuhula, who's not just a master teacher, but an activist. And so a lot of cultural activism mixed in to the nonprofit. Focus on artist housing project, on sovereignty and self-determination. And so the outreach tended to be with the non-native community. And then coming to Oregon to work with Western Arts Alliance and the Advancing Indigenous Performance program. Artist fellowships, again, a focus on educating the membership, the general membership of Western Arts Alliance about the particular group of artists that work together. So it was internal education, but for the members within the association. And helping those artists, Native artists, navigate the touring business. So Western Arts Alliance represents members who are presenters, producers, agents, all around touring performing arts. So that work was a lot about helping Native artists negotiate how to make that happen. So in all of those positions with all those organizations, a certain amount, and differing from place to place, but a certain amount of outreach, community outreach, and community engagement. So let's move. We have moved to the next slide. No, that's good. That's good. You can leave it right here. We're going to start by talking about, okay, we might as well define these things. What does Google say about community outreach and community engagement? Community outreach is defined by AI as involving directly engaging with communities to provide services, education, and resources to underserved or specific populations, often meeting them where they are located, always meeting them where they're located. Key components include building trust, strengthening relationships, and offering tailored support like food, healthcare, or housing assistance. We're not doing that particularly in the arts, but look at and remember the key words there that we want to talk about later: building trust, strengthening relationships, and providing resources. Community engagement is a collaborative strategic process of working with groups of people who are connected by geography, special interest, or affiliation to address issues affecting their well-being. And in the arts, we consider the arts as affecting their well-being. So how are we engaging community members around our art? In complex climates. Maybe I don't need to go into depth. I don't need to define that. We know what climate we're living in, but I wanted to specifically mention one thing about the funding mechanism for a lot of the work that we do, the federal funding mechanism, and the fact that Creative West is a mechanism of the NEA. It's the means by which the NEA spreads its money out into all of the states and all of our communities. And so we are all affected by what has happened recently with the NEA and with all federal funding. Just as an example, my job ended in June at Western Arts Alliance because the programs were completely funded. Initially, we had a lot of private funding for AIP. Eventually, those priorities changed and that funding was no longer there, and we relied on the NEA funding for several programs. And those grants were all rescinded as part of what happened in May and June. However, ironically, one grant that was kept was a grant for a program that we started with AIP, and that was the development of a Native Performing Arts Festival for Portland. That was not rescinded. In fact, that was a grant for this year. It was a new grant, and it was made. And so this is not to be prescriptive in any way. Each organization will make their own determinations about how they fund themselves and what they, and what hoops they need to jump through for that funding. But I will say that we, in an age where equity has become a dirty word, there is a path forward for folks who want to continue doing as much of that work as possible and still fall within the current federal guidelines. And the example that I put forth is an example of what I guess I would say the difference between focus on the word equity and the word inclusion. It seems that in this democracy, all of the particular cultural groups that we may be talking about have a place within this democratic system, and we can talk about them on their own strengths. And I guess as long as we keep in mind that we're not favoring one over another, and now this may be anathema to a lot of people, and more power to you. There are lots of organizations who have made the decision that they will not ask for federal funding, and they won't then have to be compliant with any of the restrictions. But a way to think about it is there is still funding and there's still support for particular for specific cultural groups, because we all make up this country that is America. So even though it was a little surprising to me that we got something that for a specific Native festival, I guess it made some kind of sense looking at our guidelines, the current guidelines with the NEA. Anyway, let's move on from that. We don't need to focus on complex climates. We know we're living in them. But let's talk about this community outreach and engagement. The first thing that we want to do is to understand where we live. And we'll get to that and a process for how to engage, and some little tips for reaching communities within our community. But first, let's talk about what we have done, what we have been doing. And as I said at the beginning, I'm coming from a performing arts perspective. And many of you will be from different disciplines. Please, if you feel something that you want to add from a different perspective, please add it to the chat. But a lot of my experience, having been in performing arts, there will be performing arts examples. And for me, pre-pandemic, the observable example of outreach for many performing arts people is the school visit model. So if you've ever been associated with a performing arts center, that performing arts center probably has a relationship with their local communities through the schools, the partners in the partners in education program from the Kennedy Center was a big proponent of providing support for artists teaching teachers so that the teachers then could take what they learned about the performing art to their classrooms. And that was the mechanism for sort of passing on a direct contact with an artist. That artist then, who was in town for a performance but would be there a few days early, could go into the schools, meet with students, try to excite students about the particular artwork, and with a hope on the presenter's part that the students would go home, excitedly tell their families about the work that they had seen or the artist that they had met or what their teacher had told them about the artwork, and then offer discounted tickets so that those families could come to a show later in the week. In my experience, a lot of teachers learned, and hopefully good teachers passed on what they learned to their students. A lot of students saw art firsthand. When I was with the opera, it was an exciting thing to observe students listening to singers in the same room. Singers that they may have not seen live singing before, and to hear trained opera singers sing in the same room when it's about vibration and being overwhelmed by that vibration. It was really something to observe when students understood for the first time what it means to sing, and to sing in space, not in a studio, not on a recording, but in a space where you feel that vibration. That can be life-changing. And so that, for many performing artists and organizations, was the model. And the expectation from the presenter's perspective was that these free or discounted tickets were going to drive people in. And as I said, I observed real mixed results from that school visit model, because children are not necessarily the best to represent. They can represent what they've seen, but to represent that and be an ambassador and talk a family member, a parent, a guardian into coming to see the show, that's a tall task. So are there options to that? Are there options to that model? When we hit the pandemic, and at WA, we had a lot, Western Arts Alliance, we had a lot of colleagues from other countries, a lot of Indigenous colleagues from Australia, Aotearoa, Canada. And to see what they were doing during the pandemic was pretty inspirational. And it had to be, it was about being in community, where the performance in the theater with everyone sitting in the dark was not the end goal. Whereas in that school visit model, that has been for us for a long time. So let's go to the next slide. And I want to talk about this for just a second, because this is just an example of a letter that I've had to write many times in my most recent career. And that is that at Western Arts Alliance, where there's an annual conference, a conference in a different city each year, I was tasked as the person in the Indigenous program, tasked with building a relationship with the local tribal community in each city that we went to, and to find and contract a person or people who could come and tell our members about the land that they were standing on. This is an extension of what many organizations have begun to do, land acknowledgments. In the US, we're the last. Other people in other places have been doing it for a long time and recognizing land. But we felt it was important for the people of the land of the city that we were inviting ourselves to. So in other words, we have 600 people descending on Los Angeles or Seattle or Calgary, uninvited. And should we know something about that place other than that we're in a hotel that could be anywhere, having sessions, seeing showcases, et cetera, we felt it was really important for people to have an understanding and a context of where they were and how our work is impacted by it. So this is a letter that I would write in a situation where I'm essentially cold calling or cold emailing someone, and that is not an ideal. We'll get to those steps and why that's not ideal in a second. But I wonder if there are words, just like in those definitions, if there are words that jump out or concepts that jump out from this letter that you feel are important. If you recognize something and you just want to throw it into the chat, do that. So I would write, Dear Chief Anthony, Mona, and Raphael, I'm reaching out on behalf of Western Arts Alliance, following up on Raphael's recent email, inviting your participation in activities of the 2025 annual WA conference, which will be held on your tribal lands in what is now called Los Angeles from September 2nd to the 5th, 2025. We would like to meet with you to discuss the possibility of having tribal representatives present a program session that WA organizes for all of our conferences, where we are uninvited guests on others' land, entitled The Land You're On, which helps attendees understand the history, tribal traditions, and ongoing presence of First Peoples in the place they are visiting. The program is designed by those contracted to present it. In the past, this has included a ceremonial welcome to land by a Blackfoot elder in Calgary, a history of settler colonialism by the sixth grandson of Chief Seattle in Seattle, and songs and stories of the land by a Kumeyaay singer-songwriter in San Diego. Any participants representing your people would be free to present whatever they wish to our members. A second opportunity is the opening plenary, where we offer a land acknowledgement and your representatives would offer whatever they like. Other examples, in the past, we've hosted a grand entry of dancers with the big drum, elders' blessing, offering of songs, and protocols between local nations and visiting Indigenous artists from Australia, Aotearoa, Canada, and Turtle Island. We offer a stage for you to share your message. And then I remind them that in 2019, the last time we were in Los Angeles, we had worked with them and other tribal artists. And of course, all participants are compensated for their time and gifts. If you agree, we'd like to arrange a time to sit down and speak face to face. We look forward to resuming this conversation and seeing you again now 6 years later. This is a cold call. And what do we know about cold calls? How successful are they? 0 point something, maybe. Everyone is like everyone else. We're all busy. And what do we do with cold emails? It's, unless it really excites us, it's pretty rare that we follow up on them. So I'm sending something that sort of lays out what we're hoping for. We're not looking to engage somebody to come and perform for us. We are asking essentially for a collaboration. And that's a hard thing to sort of lay out. Some things that you might note are that within, and I know we're talking beyond the Native community, but there will be sort of secret handshakes and words that we use within community, that those sort of inside things that you might want to pay attention to. Very often Native people will say, I'm in what is now called Portland, which is hinting at colonialism, right? This place is called this by the American government. It had a name before that. So we acknowledge that we understand that. We let them know right off the bat, we're not asking them to come and do a land acknowledgement. One of the advisors, the first advisors of the AIP program, and one of the co-developers of the program, Larissa Fasthorse, is a Lakota playwright. And the example that she likes to use for land acknowledgement is, so we have taken your house from you, and now you invite us to dinner. And when we get there, you ask us to welcome us to your home. That's what land acknowledgement can feel like. When you ask someone to come and welcome us, the settlers, to your land. So we don't ask anyone to come and do a land acknowledgement for us. It's on the other foot. It's our responsibility as the guest to acknowledge that we are on their land. A lot of our colleagues, for instance, from Australia, Aboriginal people from Australia, our colleagues will get very upset if they're not welcomed to territory. If you're going to a foreign nation, and you are not welcomed to that nation by the Indigenous people, you're not comfortable to be there and to have an interaction. It's something that there's an expectation there. And on the other hand, there's an expectation with a lot of Native people that you are going to gift your host. So there are a lot of protocols within the Native communities, within Native culture, for welcoming guests and being welcomed to land that is not where you're from. And the best example for me, I spent 30 plus years in Alaska and then I'm here in the Northwest, and these are canoe cultures for the most part. I mean, most people, with the exception of the Athabascans in in the interior of Alaska, but they're also on the rivers. So really, they're all canoe people, but especially marine canoe people. And this extends down into the Northwest. There's an expectation, and traditionally, you never land your canoe on someone else's land without calling out, and usually it's sung, asking for permission to land, and then being given permission to land your canoe. You would not do that without, expecting violence. Same thing in a similar sense in Hawaii. You don't enter a halau, a school or a studio, without asking or chanting, requesting permission to enter, and then having the kumu chant back a granting of permission. It's a formality, it's a protocol, but it actually exists in more places than it doesn't. And there will be, in any culture, there will be a kind of protocol that you may not know as an outsider to that culture. So it's important to learn those things. I think we should take a quick little break just because it's a long session and everyone has bio needs. And let's come back in 5 minutes if we can. I have 4:41, so we would come back at 4:46. We'll just leave this letter up, and we'll come back in 5 minutes and go into a community engagement process and discuss that. Okay.
I'm going to put up a 5-minute timer on the calendar, on the screen. So just hold everybody and you'll see that up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome back, everyone. And back to you, Ed. I'm going to put those slides once on the screen once more. Just a moment.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for your comments in the chat. Yes, you probably noted that I'm really careful in these in these emails with people that I don't know, to be as unassuming as possible, to acknowledge that we understand, for instance, that we are uninvited guests, that we don't have to be told that. It's signaling in a way that, okay, we have a basis of cultural the term I've always used is cultural competency, but that's like tolerating other people. It's a very minimal it's a very minimal measurement. We should be doing a lot better than that. So we'll use the term cultural fluency. It's signaling that you have an understanding and that you're not going to be the the ugly colonizer, the ugly settler that's coming in and having expectations without showing respect. And also presenting whatever they wish. We're not asking for a land acknowledgement. We're asking for whatever they would like to share that they feel is important for people to understand. And some folks will take that and run with it. Let's get right on to some steps for community engagement. You have to know, as I said, where you are, what is your community. And that starts by mapping, identifying the makeup of the community, its cultural and ethnic composition, its history. Like I said, in Portland, it's important to understand the history of white supremacy in understanding where other communities, how far they've come in establishing themselves in this area, and what the challenges, the extreme challenges have been. So understanding the makeup of the community and its history, and then selecting or identifying the community that it is you want to invite in and interact with. So this is really setting groundwork. Who are you trying to reach? And then how do you reach them? Who's the right person to contact? Who do we know in the community? And the experience that so many people have at AIP, I was in contact with a lot of WA members who were just trying for the first time to establish a land acknowledgement. Like that was going to check the box and take care of what they needed to be doing in terms of working with the Native community. Not understanding that that's just a first step, and the long-term relationship building is what's truly important. So how many of us have sent out this email to the local tribe, and when you ask them how things are going, they'll say, well, I sent this email and I never heard back. I was ghosted on my email, without understanding that we're often dealing with different timelines, ways of being, response responding to email is not at the top of everybody's list, like it is for those of us who work in offices and are on this fast pace and expect that a professional will answer right away. How excited we get when somebody answers us right away and we can keep working. That's not the priority for everybody. And it's important to understand sort of what our lens is and how it may be different the from the way of being of the people that we're reaching out to. So, are you ready? Are you ready for this interaction? First off, if they do respond the way you want to, can they look at your organization and see that you're ready, that you're giving them messages that you understand? Will they see themselves reflected in your facility, in your audience, in your board and staff, in the repertoire? This was always an interesting one for me at the opera because, how many people does the repertoire really appeal to? Like, this is your history, this is who you are. It's a small group of European people, right? Or maybe they're writing about something else, like Shakespeare writing, well, here we are in ... It's kind of like that. You don't know what you don't know, but will they recognize anything in your organization? Will they feel... Most Americans have not necessarily experienced what it is to be a stranger in a place, to be the only one of your color, the only one of your gender, the only one of whatever it is. we're not used to being that minority in the room, and so we don't necessarily approach with the tools that we need to use, and those are humility, understanding that it's not a quid pro quo. We're not saying, if you do this for us, we'll do this for you. How much do we want to learn about the group that we are inviting? There should always be evidence of that desire to learn. The Super Bowl is a great example. How many times have we been in places where we don't understand the language? That's a really powerful exercise, to go to a place where you don't understand the language, and to have the humility to listen. Okay, so you want to do some work in advance to make sure that there is a good reason for them to engage with you. How many times do we invite a new community to a place, to a gallery, to a center, and maybe no one in that community has ever felt welcome to step over the threshold? So what kind of work it needs to be done in advance to make our places feel welcome? So then down the list, who do you know in the community? In the example of that letter that I shared earlier, the person Raphael at the end of the list was actually a board member of Western Arts Alliance, with an organization in Los Angeles, who already had established relationships because he's working on that land. And so already had tribal groups that he had interacted with. So he's the obvious person to introduce us to someone that we don't know, because there's at least a level of trust between them and him. And if he trusts us, then maybe we're worth talking to. Who do we know? How do we get to that person? Sometimes it's an in-person introduction, if that's possible. Sometimes and often it's someone who goes to school with someone who's a tribal member, and you can ask for help in any of those places. Can you somehow get us introduced to the tribe or the person in the tribe that has the ability to make decisions about this sort of thing? And I say tribe, I also mean any group that you might be reaching out to. And are you willing to show up to their events? And how do you show up to their events? In Alaska, the going into what they call the bush, going into the rural part of the state, when you show up, the appropriate way to do it is to sit in the back and wait to be spoken to, not to show up and be loud and talkative and instructive. It's really to sit and listen, observe, and understand that you're also being observed. That early example that I mentioned about an email going out and then I never got an answer is sometimes you're being watched to see, okay, does this person have the patience? Is this just is this a request, but it's for them, and if they don't hear what they want to hear, they're going to move on. Um, they say that this work moves in its own time, and it moves uh, at the speed of trust. It's really about building relationships, and we all know when someone is really interested in getting to know us or not. So pay attention to that. And then you are introduced. And then what happens? You have a request. Um, understand reciprocity, because that's really important in so many cultures. That is there a give and take? You're not doing someone a favor because you're bringing your art form to them. Show respect. There is a privilege to being an artist when you haven't, when you're solo, when you're mobile, when you can get paid when the project is done. For so many people, in so many of the communities that you're reaching out to, there are barriers and challenges that you need to work with to alleviate, to be able to work with those artists. Those can be travel, childcare. Um, an example that, here that I ran into was trying to convince folks to apply a um, for a residency, and some of the elder artists that are like beaters, and this, for a grandma who does her beading at home watching the grandkids, there's no perceived value in why would I want to go somewhere else where I'm by myself, um, to make the artwork, because the artwork is my life. It's what I do when I'm living my life. So it's not separate in that way. We can often have, if we were trained, in university, in Western arts, we can have that attitude, not even an attitude, but it's just an aesthetic that we've learned that is Eurocentric, that quality is this, uh, that the result is this, and the ticket sales go along with that. And we need to think beyond that. more in terms of process and building relationships. So do we attend their events? Do we have anyone, do we have a cultural advisory committee? Do we have someone that we ask for, that we ask for advice from, that we ask to help curate? And the communities can have those things. Maybe not, they don't look the same way that we're used to, but within that community, they're held in esteem. Some examples of what some Indigenous artists have done is, um, I'm if I'm contracted, I'm not the only Native person contracted. There needs to be somebody else, someone on your staff or another artist that's doing, that's also in the room. That an experienced artist in a community will often hold the door for other artists. In other words, if you bring me in, I'm going to hold the door to try to get someone else in. The value of elders, the value of youth. For someone trained in the theater, which is dominated by that attitude that Richard Wagner did, in the opera house, which is that the lights all come down and we all sit quietly in the dark and are respectful and don't make noise. That's not a value to everyone. In Alaska, it was important for the children to be in the room, for the families to be in the room. And so it was important how the children were treated. And in some cultures, it's perfectly fine for the children to sort of move as they will. And if that means walking across the stage, then we don't stop the show for that. That's what the culture expects. And we have to, learn to not be stuck in that quiet darkness. There's another example from, and I would love to be able to share this with you, the actual article. It was written by WA staff, sort of reporting on a session from our 2024 conference. And unfortunately, it's behind not a paywall, but it's in a members only area of the Western Arts Alliance website. So I'm just going to tell you about it right here because I can't really share the link with you. But it's called There's No Such Thing as Best Practices. And this is one of our colleagues, Christopher Morgan and Shalia Ben, who is with Idlewild Arts outside of LA, shared what it means to be Indigenous artists and presenters and how they work with other Indigenous artists. And there's we don't have best practices. Here are some guiding principles. And they were that we begin with relationship as a foundation. And this, again, across cultures. You don't begin with the artistic engagement. You build a relationship way in advance by listening, by showing up, by learning. Because many artists, as I said, might be dealing with a different family situation, with their own identities and geography and traditions. And there are people, we cannot assume that people were all brought up in traditional environments. A lot of people are away from their homelands, especially immigrants. And we have to establish a relationship and be holistic in our thinking about their well-being as an artist. It's not about a fee for a service in that transactional sense. It's about them being able, what they need to be their whole selves and to be there with us. So are we taking care of Are they worried about their family being taken care of? Do they need childcare? Do they not have a ride? Do they not have a bank account? We assume travel, is easy for everybody, but for some it's not. So what do we need to provide to allow them to really show up fully without having to choose between their family and work? Can we convene in non-transactional ways? Can we gather around food? If you work with Native communities, food is the glue. Food is what brings people together, and where conversations can happen, out of which collaborations occur, where we begin to understand each other and we create some cultural fluency. Your institution needs to have cultural fluency. So that can mean training your board and training your staff. Think about, again, especially for Indigenous artists, how you are compensating folks. Do you, particularly and with any traditional people, if what's being shared is in any way ceremonial, there could be a taboo against accepting money for that. Are there gifts? Could you take care of the travel or the childcare or some other compensation that's not, monetary remuneration? Can you pay people for the work they do as they do it? We learned in the pandemic with so many contracts being canceled that, often artists are doing a bulk of the work before they even get to you, and they should be compensated for that. Can you pay in cash? Because some artists don't have the bank account or they prefer cash. And is your organization set up so that the accounting department is not telling you we cannot do that? Can you gift? It's really important not to show up without a gift in a lot of cultures. Can you put that in your budget? Like federal funding, of course, we know that food and gifts and that sort of thing, cannot be paid for with federal funds, but you can find it somewhere. And you need to have a budget that is, that is set up to handle those things that come up. And the active work matters. It's not about being perfect. You have to go in knowing that I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to stick my foot in it, and I need to, tone down my ego and let that happen, because that's the only way I'm going to learn. It's not about being perfect. You have to be willing to be critiqued in order to learn, and invite that. Tell me what I need to know, and then do better. So those are just some of the things that they talked about in a conversation that was really, really important. Okay, let's move on. I mentioned the word collaboration, and I think that's a great, great thing to think about with working with communities other than your own. I'm a huge fan of collaboration. It's a ton of work. It's more work than not collaborating, but the rewards are for sure worth it. Because you can do something together that you can't do on your own. I'm always amazed that I think we have one of the most perfect examples of collaboration, and it's in so many of our communities, in cities anyway, around, in December. What do we see? We see the Nutcracker comes to town, right? And it's always a professional ballet company. Not always, I'm saying in a lot of examples, it's a professional ballet company. And they don't bring the whole thing, they'll bring their set. They work with the local orchestra. And then what do? They're brilliant, and the show is the perfect vehicle for professional dancers working with a dance school or a local dance company, and tying in the entire community of the entire dance community within a city, within an area. And that collaboration is designed to work that way. And we can work that way in a lot of different instances. But there are things to be aware of. You know, you want to you want to put these things together. When I was at the opera, I ended up leaving the opera because I wanted to collaborate with the Native community, and the board just wasn't into it. So I went to work with the Native community. But it's one thing to imagine these things being together on a stage. You then have to remind yourself that you put a storyteller on stage, an elder, again, where this is an example that's an indigenous example, an indigenous elder on stage, and you want them to tell this story, and you're going to weave dance around it, whatever. Be aware that your sense of the timing of what has to happen on stage may be different from the internal timing of what it is to tell a story in a traditional way. It's even, you know, it's joked about in the Native community very often that, you know, if you give the mic to the elder, then just be ready for, you know, the fact that it's going to be a half an hour later before you get it back, because the story takes the time that it takes, and it's not operating on this in this place that the theater producer is at. You know, it's got to happen this way, this way, this way, and we're all working on timing. You may get there, but you'll get there through respect and through communication, and through an attitude of maybe learning something from that, rather than that those collaborators need to adjust to you. There's also often a bias between Western, the classical Western disciplines, dance, orchestra, symphony, opera, many of those. And well, we want to collaborate, we want to work with other communities, but we have to preserve the quality, as if that Western, that European aesthetic is the be all, and not allowing yourself to change through the process of collaborating. But you have to be willing to go through the messiness before you can get to what works for everybody. So there's some, just be aware that you are going to walk into these situations with a certain bias. Okay. We're going to speed up here a little bit so that we have some time for you to ask questions. This slide that we have up right now, I love this example from an organization here in Portland. This was published in HowlRound, which is a theater commons based, I believe, in Boston. It's online, HowlRound. It's mostly related to theater. But this was something that Emily Johnson and the folks at Portland Institute for Contemporary Art put together, because and don't change the slide if you would yet. There's a QR code here for you to, if you want to shoot that QR code to get to this HowlRound article, I would recommend that while we're talking about it. So just so you can read it later on. But this came about, okay, we can switch to the next slide, and then we'll switch back to this QR code in a second. This all came about because an artist here in the community wrote an Instagram post that said, "To all institutions practicing land acknowledgements, tell us, what steps do you take to hold space for and center Indigenous peoples? How are you actively working to pay Indigenous people, donate to Indigenous causes, protect Indigenous land and water rights, and promote Indigenous sovereignty? That was a challenge to this organization, which thought, that it was being a good liberal American organization and making space for everybody and doing everything right because they were doing a land acknowledgement. And they really had to sort of internally, as an organization, they had to think through, not be defensive, but actually figure out what they could commit to. And just very quickly, what they did commit to was pursuing an ongoing process of consciousness shifting. In other words, we as an organization have got to shift our consciousness about working with other people. And again, I'm going to say it over and over again. I'm talking about an Indigenous example, but take this and relate it to any community within your community that you are hoping to work with. You need to shift consciousness. They committed to land acknowledgements before every public event, to ensure Indigenous artists are represented in their annual festival and their year-round programming. And in order to do that, to dedicate 10% of their artistic budget to that. Strengthen trusted relationships with tribal entities here in Oregon. Have Indigenous representation on their staff and board. Again, as I said earlier, what do people see when they look in at your organization? Do they see themselves or no? Listen when critiqued. Don't get defensive. Pursue ongoing learning. Incorporate decolonization in everything that they do. Here's an important one. They turn over physical and material space, time, and resources to BIPOC identified artists. And there's an unwritten one at the end of that, which is and curation. So what they do is they work with the Black community. They make their space available. They make a percentage of their budget for that work, time and resources, their tech staff, their marketing staff. They turn all of that over to the artists that they're working with. And they do not insist on having the curatorial last word. So the community curates their own work. Often maybe an organization would do all those things except the last one, right? Because of that quality work, quote unquote. They build Indigenous connections nationally and internationally, and they create platforms for Indigenous-led curation and programming. So it's about taking the resources that you have been privileged to receive as an organization and making it available to other people and stepping back. So that's again, the kind of thinking that has served them well. It's not easy, it's messy. It takes a lot of retraining your own brain, but it works for them. Okay. Let's show an example. You'll hear Aaron. This project. Yeah, go ahead. Is one of the opportunities that has put us sort of on the cutting edge of what's happening between organizations and artists.
It's a little bit of a mindset shift from being this kind of promoter, kind of an old school presenter model where like, I'm going to bring in a show and sell tickets and do this. But if you're really spending that energy into building relationships, it's so much better for everyone.
It's redesigning the role that we have, and the purpose is feeling much more deep and much more centered in the traditional ways of this land.
So this was a project that several organizations we're involved with. The last person, Asia Freeman, is from Bunnell Street Arts Center in Homer, Alaska. And Aaron is from Portland Institute. And they've done a lot of work with their staffs and their boards and their programming to do this kind of sharing turnover of resources, and have found the relationship building so fruitful. and I would encourage anyone to get in touch with either of them to talk about this in more depth, because they've really, really done the work. Very quickly, I want to leave some time for questions if there are any. But there was an exercise I think we'll have to kind of race through here. But I put together just a small template for the process that I use, which is community mapping, as I said, to follow the pointer on cues. Can I ask you to scroll down just a little bit? Thanks. Community mapping, connections. Who do we know? Readiness. Are we ready? What are our goals? What are we proposing? And then how are we accountable to a long range plan? So the bottom line, if we can go to the next slide, again, this is a QR code that if you want to download this, this template, you can go ahead and download. We'll also provide it for you after the webinar. But let's go to the next slide and see basically what I did to complete it. And we won't have time to go through the entire exercise together because I want you to be able to ask questions. But the bottom line here is you can all do this. Start by mapping your community. Google your city and demographics or ethnic cultural makeup. When I did that, I got some very specific numbers about Portland's makeup of white, Latina, Asian, Black, Native, multiple race, and trends, like what groups are growing, what groups are immigrant or foreign born. Are any of them represented in the repertoire that we do? How does our work impact or react to what we see in the growth trends? Is our work impacted by English as a second language, by immigration trends? There's a lot that you can pull just from that information and begin to decide. I am told by my colleagues in the Latina communities, the people in the West do not understand the percentages of Latina population in Western communities is so much larger than most people understand, and where the success of that Super Bowl halftime is like it's not foreign to everybody, or even to most people. There are ways that we can serve those communities once we understand the extent of those communities and how much they're a part of the work that we do. So who do we know? Very
Pardon
often,
me.
yeah,
Hi, Ed.
we need to move on.
Yes,
Yes, we do.
it's
I'm
about
so
4 minutes.
sorry. I just over explained the whole thing. But anyway, you can look through those. You can imagine what they are when you work through this thing, and then just be really honest about your self-assessment, where you lack and where you need to sort of meet the moment. Yes. Over to you, Marcelina.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ed. And we are going to move into the Q&A section of this before we close out. Ed, you always are so knowledgeable and have so much to give and to teach, and we're so grateful. And does anybody have any questions or anything that they would want to ask? So I'm going to look in the chat.
There's a
I have,
question. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I have one from Sierra Hutton. Do you have strategies for managing two distinct cultures and one performance? You mentioned the children being allowed to move around. I can imagine that would not go over very well with, say, an older white audience. I would hate to segregate our audience even unintentionally and not pigeonhole one type of audience from another.
Mm-hmm. And my reaction to that is, what's going to prevent that older audience from appreciating that? And that's a little bit of education. I mean, once I first read about Richard Wagner, the Wagner operas, the huge, big, 100-person player symphonies, and all the, the Valkyries and all of that big, big, big stuff. It was not until Wagner, until the 1940s, that we insisted on everyone sitting quiet in the theater. In Mozart's time, there was gambling and prostitution and everything, and people eating food and making noise. And that was the expectation, and that's a lot of the reason that so many things in opera are repeated and repeated and repeated. If you don't get it the first time, you might hear it the second time. Um, but it's really about being honest with those audience members and bringing them along. These are not it's not making the cat and dog kiss each other. There's an long story I won't get into about my grandfather doing that, and the result, which was really messy. But we can get along once we get to know each other and we spend time with each other. And so, I mean, the strategy for working with different cultures is understanding that it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, but find ways to put those folks together to experience each other's things. Is We started working at the opera with the Native Heritage Center just by saying, okay, this is a wild and crazy idea, but we could do this thing together and put opera and native dance together. And it wasn't until we actually got people in a room and tried it that light bulbs started going off. So imagine ways to get people in the same room. It's not just at the performance. Start way before that. When you're at the performance, for instance, can you have a marketplace in your lobby? Where or where the other community is serving their artists, their artisans, but you're also letting people meet and talk with each other and learn about each other. I think it's committing to a long term and being really creative about how you put people together in ways that everybody likes to eat. So serve a dinner and tell stories and let people learn about each other. That's what I would suggest.
Thank you so much, Ed Bourgeois, and thank you all for participating, coming to this capacity building webinar. As mentioned throughout the webinar, we do have a survey, and we ask that you all please make sure to complete that survey. Next, what's next in the capacity building webinars? This will be, excuse me. I think actually have something different, and apologies for that. This should be contracts. So talking about contracts for individual artists, and that will be held in March 10th. So and also making sure that you can please sign up for our current information on grants, awards, and opportunities. Let's see. And I'll drop that in the chat as well. Or you can also use this QR code. I want to thank everyone for providing their time and asking questions. And we hope to see you again next month. Bye.
And the recording will be sent out sometime later this week with the updated slide deck, as well as any links and informations that we had today, including Ed's links as well. So thank you so much again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Great stuff.
So good to
Thank you,
see you,
everyone.
Elena.
Tosh.
Thank you for interpreting.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Marcelina, Shanti, and Rachel, and Mariah. Great working with you. Everyone have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ashanti, I'm going to go ahead and make you host so that you can stop the recording and it'll be on your end.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. Yay. I think that's everyone. And we did it, y'all.
Yay. Thank you so much. Thank you,
We went a
Ed.
couple minutes over, but you can edit out pauses maybe.
You're the best, Ed. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you
this
for
is
the
really
opportunity.
insightful.
Yeah, and we can share my email. So I'm happy to talk with. I noticed there were a lot of Alaskans on, but I'm happy to answer any questions or any follow-up with folks. Yeah.
Yay. Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Have a good
Talk to
night.
you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.